Hello, grade 4 students. How are you all doing? Welcome to a new science lecture video, and we are still talking about reproduction of plants. Most plants on Earth are flowering plants, and these plants use their flowers in the reproduction process. Since these flowers show the male reproductive organ and the female reproductive organ, the stamen and the pistil. But stamens and pistils aren't the only parts engaged in the reproduction process. There is also the petals. The petals are the colorful parts that attract pollinators to the flower. The sepals are the leaf-like structures that protect the flower as it is growing. Here is the anther, which is the head of the stamen. The job of the anther is to produce pollen grains. And here is the filament. The anther with the filament can make the stamen. Here is the stigma that will receive the pollen grains. Then the style and the ovary that carries the ovules inside. The stigma, the style, and the ovary make the pistil. A pollinator, such as a butterfly, transfers pollen grains from the anther of the stamen to the stigma of the pistil. That's what we call pollination. So pollination is when pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the pistil. The pollen grain then moves to the ovules to make a seed. Once the seed is in the soil and in the right conditions, the seed will grow into a seedling, the seedling into an adult plant, the plant will grow flowers, and then the flowers will make seeds. And then the life cycle of the plant will start all over again. We talked about flowering plants, which are seed plants. Conifers are also seed plants, but conifers do not make flowers. They do not bloom. They grow cones. And they have needle-like leaves. So their leaves look like needles. They grow two types of cones, pollen cones and seed cones. And as you can see, and as shown in the figure, the pollen cones are smaller than the seed cones. The job of the pollen cones is to produce pollen, and then the wind transfer pollen from the pollen cones to the seed cones. When the pollen meets the ovules in the seed cones, you'll have a seed. So pollination happens with the help of wind, and then you'll have a seed. The seed in the soil will grow into a new conifer. Examples of conifers are pine trees, spruce trees, cedar trees, cypress trees, redwood trees, giant sequoia trees, and so on. So flowering plants and conifers are seed plants. When talking about flowering plants, in our previous lecture videos, we said that some plants are non-flowering and they do not grow flowers at all. Let me tell you that mosses and ferns do not make cones also. So mosses and ferns do not make flowers, and they do not grow cones either. So how do they reproduce? Do they make seeds? Mosses and ferns are non-seed plants. They do not make seeds at all. Let's start talking about mosses. So these are mosses. Mosses are small, non-seed, soft plants that they are short usually. They do not have true roots, true stems, or true leaves. They grow in wet spaces and they grow in damp. They grow together in damp. How do they reproduce? They reproduce by growing or by making spores. So look in these. Let me play the video. And look right here. You'll see spores going out, and these spores will be transferred, and when they find the right conditions, they will grow into a new moss plant. Again, did you see? Look right here, you can clearly see the spores of the moss plant. So these spores will grow into new mosses plants. What about ferns? Here is a picture of fern plants. The fern plant, so fern plants are also non-seed plants. Look at the leaf of a fern plant. The fern plant has leaves made of smaller leaflets. So here is the leaf. Here is the leaf, and the leaf is called a frond. The leaf of a fern plant is called a frond, and on the underside of the frond you will see spores. These spores will help the fern plant reproduce and make new fern plants. So both mosses and fern plants have spores, and these spores will help them to reproduce and to make new other plants. What about mushrooms? Before we talk, but you can clearly see right here the word spores, aren't you, right? Can you see the word spores? So mushrooms or fungi use also spores to reproduce. Before we talk about reproduction of mushrooms, let's see the different parts of a fungus, of a mushroom. Here we have the cap, and here the gills of the mushroom. This is the stipe or the stem of the mushroom. And then we have threads. They are like roots for the mushroom. I'll draw them for you. So right here, you can see like threads. These are called mycelial threads. What are the different parts of a mushroom? The cap, the gills, the stipe or stem, and the mycelial threads. In order to reproduce, the mushroom releases spores. The mushroom releases spores. And these spores will be transferred to other places. And when they find these spores, so when they find the right conditions and the right place, will grow into a new mushroom. Here is the small mushroom, and it will grow into a big mushroom. Let me show you the spores. Look. So in a mushroom, or the mushroom releases spores, these spores will be transferred. They will find the right place to grow into new mushrooms. But you need to be careful. There is something that I want to tell you. Mushrooms are not plants. Mushrooms are not plants. The common thing between mosses, ferns, and mushrooms is that they all reproduce by making spores. Okay. Plants can be seed plants, like flowering plants and conifers. Flowering plants are plants that grow seeds in their flowers. Conifers are plants that grow seeds in their cones. What about non-seed plants? Mosses and ferns are non-seed plants. Can I add the mushrooms? No, I cannot. Because mushrooms are not plants. Mushrooms are not plants. I cannot put them with the mosses and the ferns. Mosses and ferns are non-seed plants. Mosses, as I told you, are soft plants. They do not have true roots, leaves, or stems, and they reproduce by making spores. Ferns also. Ferns reproduce by making spores. The spores can be seen on the underside of a frond, which is the leaf of a fern plant. Both mosses and ferns reproduce by making spores. What about mushrooms? Mushrooms are mushrooms. They are not plants. They are not animals for sure. They have a kingdom. They have a group for themselves, for mushrooms only. So fungi are fungi, or mushrooms are mushrooms. A mushroom has different parts. So let me show you some pictures of mushrooms. So as you can see, this is the cap of the mushroom. And then from the inside, this is the gills of the mushroom. The gills of the mushroom, let me use this too. So the gills of the mushroom. And this is the stipe, and the stipe of a mushroom. And here are the mycelial threads, of the mushroom. Okay, all mosses, ferns, and mushrooms